Hi everybody, Armored Pants here, and I have long awaited and much promised video for you guys, the Sherman Firefly complete review. Now, before we get into the tech spec and some gameplay, we're going to have a look at this vehicle in terms of its historical context, because it is a iconic vehicle of the Second World War. If we look at the history of the vehicle, there were approximately 2,100 to 2,300 of these vehicles produced between 1943 and 1945. Now, you may ask the question, why was the Sherman Firefly variant created? Well, it was created by the British, using obviously the Sherman M4 tank as its base. But by 1943, with the emergence of the Panther and the Tiger in particular, there was a feeling among Allied command that they simply didn't have the firepower to penetrate these German tanks, the German heavy cats, as they called them. So what the British decided to do was to take to replace the 75mm low muzzle velocity gun on the Sherman M4, and to replace that with a 17-pounder anti-tank gun. Now, 17-pounder gun is actually only 76.3 millimeter. So you're probably thinking, well, that's not a huge increase, Armored. So why was it so effective then? Well, the reason is it's down to muzzle velocity. Now, we've discussed this many times on Blitz, and it's one of the key tenets of my sort of philosophy on Blitz, is that you maximize out the muzzle velocity. And the reason is that muzzle velocity is squared in the formula for armor penetration. It's basic physics. The faster a projectile travels, the more likely it is to pen. Just think about, if you lob a stone or throw a stone, how much more damage it does if you throw it rather than just lob it gently in your hand, right? Even though it's the same projectile, right? It's the same thing with shells. And the 17-pounder anti-tank gun, which they then mounted onto the M4 hull, had significantly more muzzle velocity, significantly more penetration, therefore, and was able to take on the Panther and the Tiger. The tank served in Italy, but I guess it gained its fearsome reputation in Normandy in 1944. There are battles in which it featured where it took out Panthers and Tigers. In one case, battle in Normandy in 1944, one sergeant in the Armoured Corps took out 5 Panthers in one engagement, which is significant and one of the few tanks that was capable of doing that. In terms of deployment, the Sherman Fireflies were not deployed in groups on their own. They were actually one given to companies of Shermans. The thinking being that if they encountered Panthers or Tigers, they would at least have one tank that would be able to penetrate those German big cats. And of course, I guess the Sherman Firefly is most famous for the shot that killed the famous Waffen SS captain Michael Wittmann. Michael Wittmann had become infamous or famous, depending on which side you were on, because of the Battle of Villers-Bocage, where he took out 14 British vehicles in one engagement. And this, of course, was hyped up by the Nazis to make him a national war hero. So it came as quite a shock when he was eventually taken out, particularly given the fearsome reputation that the Tiger had. But it was indeed a shot from the Sherman Firefly which killed Wittmann's tank. Not only did it kill it, it actually ammo racked it, so it penned the armor and it hit the ammo rack. So initially, Wittmann's tank began to smoke, and then the turret blew off, killing Wittmann and some of his crew as well, actually all of his crew. So ended one of the great tanking legends of World War II, and at the hands of this iconic British Sherman Firefly tank. It was used by the British, obviously. It was also used by the Canadians, New Zealanders, and South African armored brigades during World War II, and it fought with great effect. Now, the Germans obviously realized that this tank was one of the few Allied tanks that could pen the Tiger and Panther. So, and obviously the Firefly, because of its elongated and larger barrel gun, was easy to distinguish from Norman Shermans. So German tank commanders would target them specifically as soon as they saw them. So this led to a lot of very high casualties among Firefly crews. So therefore the Firefly crews started to disguise their tanks by camouflaging and covering the barrels so that the Germans couldn't distinguish them from a distance as being different to normal Shermans. And in that hope, then in that regard, they hoped that they would be able to at least survive first sighting and again a chance to engage the Germans on an equal footing. So the Sherman Firefly then was an exceptionally effective tank, noted for that very powerful gun and that high penetration numbers given by that increased muzzle velocity. So historically iconic tank, a tank which solved a lot of problems for the Allies because it was for most of the campaign in Normandy and indeed 1945 until the arrival of the Pershing. It was one of the few tanks that could actually pen the German tanks and give the Allies a chance in armored battles. So an iconic tank. So let's have a look at it in terms of its characteristics in Blitz, and we'll go into blitzhanger.com to do that. So let's have a quick look. I'm going to get out of the box, jump onto another mic, and let's take it away from there. Ow, that box is a tight squeeze. Anyway, let's have a look at the tech spec using blitzhanger.com, and let's have a look at the setup. So in terms of provisions, I would run putting on T, improved fuel, and T. It's very important for maxing out the effectiveness of the tank. I'd run gun rammer, supercharged, and refined gun, but you can also use vertical stabilizer, and we'll discuss why in a second. 17-pounder gun or 76.3mm anti-tank gun is what it has as a top gun, which we discussed in the historical aspects. The reload is 4.8 seconds or going out to 5.2 seconds if you run calibrated shells. Pen is 171mm AP, 239 with APCR 20mm. If you use gun rammer, goes up to 180, 251, 22 with calibrated shells. So you're not really going to pen anything with the HE rounds, right? So basically this tank is going to be about the AP and APCR. Damage is low, right? It's 160, 135 and 200. But as we said, that 200 is very unlikely given the low pen numbers on the HE rounds. Muzzle velocity is 146 meters per second for AP and HE, going up to 1437 meters per second for APCR. To put this in context, guys, what's more or less the same muzzle velocity as the VK9001P, which we recently reviewed, so like kind of tier 10. Gun index is 11.5, but if you use refined gun, it goes up to 14.36. And that's something to bear in mind, and why I would suggest using a refined gun rather than gun rammer, because this tank is all about the gun. It's basically a mobile anti-tank gun rather than a medium tank per se, so therefore I would consider using that to max out that gun handling. The mobility index is 6.5, which is okay, and it could be better, but it's basically lowered by that poor power to weight ratio, and you will experience that when you drive this tank. Its power to weight ratio is pretty bad. But that's what you would kind of expect from a tank like this, which is carrying a gun, which it wasn't originally designed for. Concealment numbers are okay, so a tank with a view range of 294 meters is going to spot you up at 235 meters if you're still, and your view range is 279 meters. So your view range is okay. It's nothing special. It's not great. It's not bad. It's just adequate. If there's no light tanks on the team or whatever, you can't spot. But if there's light tanks in the team, I would leave the spotting to them because your view range is just adequate, nothing special. Now, in terms of the armor of this tank, it has some armor, but not much. Even when it was created, historically, this tank wasn't about taking hits from the 88mm guns on the Tiger or the 75mm on the Panther. It was really about being able to pen them. If it got hit by a German shell, it usually got penned. And that is kind of reflected in Blitz as well, right? You can't sight scrape on it if you get into a good angle. You've really no armor at the back or the sides, and if you're up against heavy tanks front on, you're going to get penned. And that is historically accurate. That also was the case with the Sherman Firefly. In real battles, that wasn't its strength. It has also lower gun depression than you would expect from British or German or US tanks, only 6 degrees and 20 degrees of elevation, so it has decent gun alignment. It has, of course, that lower gun depression because it's obviously carrying a much bigger gun and longer barrel than it was originally designed for. So that's also sort of historically accurate and something that we can live with, I guess, because this tank is all about getting that gun into position and utilising that rate of fire and those pen numbers. You've got low alpha damage, so therefore it's another reason I run gun rammer, because you want to fire as often as possible to get your alpha rolls up and get your damage per minute up. So basically, in terms of tactics for this tank, you know, it's slightly different to most medium tanks, and that's maybe why people struggle with this tank a bit. Look on this tank as effectively a mobile anti-tank gun, and you have a mobility index that allows you to get into position. So use this effectively more or less as a support tank. You know, if your mediums are going and lights are going in the medium light channel, go with them, but go behind them so that you can utilize that rate of fire and that penetration numbers to do damage onto the enemy. If you want to go with your heavies, you can also then use their armor for protection and utilize that penetration numbers and rate of fire. So let's have a look at some gameplay where you actually have these tactics in play. Now this is a very interesting game because firstly, I'm up tiered, it's supremacy, but the main interesting thing about this is it's a double mastery game. So it's a mastery for me in the Firefly, but it's also a mastery for the Black Prince on my team. And we do a bit of a carry between us. Now you can see here, I originally am going to go to A, but unfortunately none of my teammates decided to go that way. My light tanks are going to go the opposite way. They're going to go towards C, so I don't really have any choice. You can't go off on your own, especially as you're bottom tier. You're going to get smashed. Also looking at the setup, I see that they have a number of light tanks on their team too, and medium, so I'm going to run into all of them on my own if I go that way. So I changed direction, and what I decided to do is I'm going to see if I can, as we discussed during the tactics and during the tech spec, see if I can lend support to my heavy tanks and get into position. There you see that muzzle velocity in action there, pens right through the turret of the Tiger P. Don't know why the KV3 decided to go right behind me, then blocks my shots. I don't know, but it is what it is. So you have to just then adapt your play. So I decided to move on, see if I can get a shot into the Tiger P. There's not much going to happen here, so what I decided to do is decide to move into the dip in the ground here, see if I can get some shots into the enemy, and if I can just put up my turret. We saw from the armor profile that the gun mounted is a large part of the front of the turret, so therefore this tank is difficult to pen, even for a bigger gun like the one on the Tiger, difficult to pen through the turret front on. We see here I've got the VK 3D601 in front of me. Switch up to APCR now, because I'm not being able to pen him through. There is a vulnerable part on the cheeks of the VK3601 here, not getting pen onto him, so I switch up to APCR. We know APCR has higher pen numbers, largely due to, as we discussed again, its muzzle velocity. The APCR rounds are switching up to over 1400 meters per second. Actually, I think the problem I had there was I didn't switch up to APCR. I left it at AP, and that obviously was the problem. And again, I should have switched to APCR here. Don't, and I actually take a hit from the Tiger. But then on the side, don't make any mistake. Pen him, cleared him off. But now it's 4v3 situation, but I'm able to clear off their KV3. Shot right through the turret, again showing nice pen numbers in this tank. Now, in this game now, it's sort of going to be very, very close. It's 3v2. What I decided to do is I decided to capture C. As we discussed before many times in this game, it's all supremacy. It's all about gaining points when you can. So I decided to give us an advantage. Now, I thought they might engage the Black Prince, but in actuality they're focusing fire on me, so I have to change the aspect of my attack. I've taken a few hits now, which were unnecessary. I should change the aspect of my attack earlier. Now I changed positions. I'm going to go around to the other side, and I'm going to get some joy there. And again, that's something which is sort of another basic tenet of my play in Blitz. If you change the aspect of your attacks, you can get a lot more joy. And you can see here the Bulldog is not expecting me to to be there, and I'm able to clear him off. And now we've taken this death to 2v1 situation, which is really good considering where we were. But as I said, guys, in terms of the play for this tank, right? This tank, a good way to look at it is not as your standard medium tank in terms of your tactics. The better way to look at this is that it is effectively an anti-tank weapon, which is just on a medium tank. And if you look on it in that respect, then I think you'll get more joy from playing this tank. Just to quickly interrupt here, you can see that is a mastery for me and also a mastery for the Black Prince too, which is unusual. It happens, of course, but great to see, and also a very nice team play from him. So I would look at this tank in that respect, guys. Don't look at it as a medium tank, because then, you know, the lack of mobility is going to, you know, maybe leave you a bit frustrated trying to play it as a pure medium. Look at it as a fast-moving anti-tank weapon. Get it into positions, and then if you look at it in that respect, you're going to see it more as a support role, where you utilize that penetration numbers and that good rate of fire to support other vehicles in your team. Get into positions where you're not getting into brawls, where you're not getting into circle of deaths, because it has that poor power to weight ratio and poor traverse. Get into positions where you're actually supporting, where you have clear lines of fire and can put damage into the enemy, utilizing that excellent gun system that it has, that excellent penetration and those excellent rate of fire. And that also, by the way, guys, is why I would run maybe run refined gun rather than vertical stabilizer, because you're firing more when you are still than when you're moving than you would in a standard normal tank. So guys, I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it enjoyable. I hope you found the historical stuff a bit interesting too. I certainly did, because this is historically a super tank, historically an iconic tank, and it was indeed a fearsome opponent on the Western Front battlefields, and one of the few tanks on the Western Front that the Germans actually feared. So guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful, and now I guess all remains for me to say is, as always, pants off.